Hello and welcome to the second edition of the Bishkek Express podcast, a podcast where in each episode we will discuss hot topics in Kyrgyzstan, Central Asia, and beyond. I'm your host, Austin Reach, an intern for Evidence Central Asia. In today's podcast, we are joined by Dr. Damir Esenaliev, a Berlin-based Susamir native who wears many hats. Not only is Dr. Esenaliev a senior researcher at the International Security and Development Center in Berlin, but our guest also serves as the academic coordinator of the Life in Kyrgyzstan Study. There's an ocean of publications with Dr. Esenaliev's names, but just to name a couple, we can mention Social Cohesion, Ethnicity, and Well-Being, Results from an Intervention Study in Kyrgyzstan, Household Survey Data for Research on Well-Being and Behavior in Central Asia, and Life with Corona, Shared Global Sentiments and Stark Generational Divides. This afternoon, our conversation with our guest will be centered around three primary topics. Actually, four. Firstly, we're going to discuss what I believe to be his latest publication, an article published to the Journal of Development Studies titled Welfare Effects of Smallholder Export Participation, Evidence from Panel Data in Kyrgyzstan. Secondly, I'll ask just a couple questions from his chapter in an ADB study on Kyrgyzstan. Next, we're going to chat about Dr. Esenaliev's involvement in the Life in Kyrgyzstan study. And to finish things off, Dr. Esenaliev and I are going to have a chat about current economic developments in Kyrgyzstan. Dr. Esenaliev, welcome.
Thank you, Austin, for having me.
Absolutely. So, for some introductory questions to learn about you, can you please tell the listeners of the Bishkek Express podcast about who you are, where you come from, and what you're doing now?
Yeah, thank you, Austin. I'm from Kyrgyzstan, and I was born and raised here till my more or less after university years. And then at some point I studied in United States for my master's degree. Then after a few years of working back here, I did my doctoral degree in Germany, in Berlin. And since then I stayed in Europe, conducted my research about Kyrgyzstan mostly. And that's how I would say about myself.
Okay. And for your master's, you were on the East Coast, right?
Yeah, I did my master's at Williams College in Massachusetts, which has a program in development economics and one of the oldest programs in the United States.
Interesting. Were you in the capital of Boston?
Interestingly not. I did my travels mostly through New York, so that's how I ended up not being in Boston, but hopefully I will do in the future.
That's interesting. So the last guest I had, Dr. Hager, you went to lunch with him right after the first podcast. How was that?
Yeah, I think he has a very interesting mission, looking how the Soviet Union established itself in Central Asia. I think there is a really interesting niche of research looking at the more or less historical topics, and I think his research ideas are very interesting. That was one side of our conversation. Another was the current project we've been doing with Evidence Central Asia and this Anselm on how participation of rural women can be promoted in local decision making. So we are more or less more than in the middle of our stage of research, and we've been collecting data, and we will be collecting one more round of data in October, and then we will see what's going on.
Okay, so you guys are participating in the same meta-keta, as you would call it?
That's correct.
Okay. And can you tell us why you're in Bishkek right now?
Yeah, I'm in Bishkek for my summer vacation with my family, visiting my parents, relatives, siblings, and big family kind of network, also friends. This year, I also took my kids and family to south of Kyrgyzstan driving. So that was probably my duty to show around because they were small when we left. Mm-hmm. And in that respect, just to see around and show how country looks like in different places.
Mm-hmm. Did you take them back to your native Susamir?
Yeah, that was kind of end of the trip, and we really enjoyed being there. Just really see your roots and the place you were raised. In fact, I was spending most of my preschool time with my grandparents, and it's where I believe my really true motherland or fatherland is.
Okay. And do you still have family in your hometown to this day?
Yeah, I have my uncle and his son and quite extensive network of family, so-called tribe.
Wow. I'm glad you and your family can experience that all over again.
Yeah.
So I want to know, where does your passion for researching economics, agriculture, and rural development come from?
Most of the things I did in my life looks a bit opportunistic, not really systematic. So I started my career working in central banking, looking at macroeconomy, mostly balance of payments issues. And then after my study in the United States, somehow I switched to micro level, which is studying people's lives. And it was my time at the World Bank office. So in that respect, I think it's quite unique that I can also see micro and micro connections. And I think there are very few people who can kind of see what implications some macro decisions can have on people's lives. Rural development and agriculture is partly because of my current employment. So not only I work at ISDC, which is a small part of my work, but my most work is at so-called Leibniz Institute for Vegetable and Ornamental Crops, where I conduct research about food security, rural development, and other topics. So that was one reason I'm in more or less agricultural research at the moment, but in different stages of my research, I did different topics like social cohesion, labor markets, or education.
Okay. Thank you for that explanation. I don't think it's as opportunistic as it could be. I mean, you are enjoying what you're writing about and researching, yes?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, most interesting parts when you go to field and talk to people and ask, this is what my research looks like, what do you think?
Mm-hmm.
And you gain a lot of insights. What you think is right, in fact, is not right.
Mm-hmm.
So in that respect, you learn a lot. So I think that's part of my work, data collection and talking to people who you research to gain insights and be quite confident when you talk about the topic.
Certainly. And speaking of those insights, because you have worked with such organizations like World Bank and the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, do you think that working with them has helped shape your perspective of research, the world, Central Asia, and Kyrgyzstan?
Yeah, I think definitely every experience helps. I think World Bank was very interesting how these international organizations work with governments. So this is how they work. So loans and development aid comes to the hands of government. And my work at CIPRI in Sweden showed me how kind of ideal place of work could be and how global topics can be. It's really indeed a global institute. And my work in Germany definitely taught me to do proper so-called quantitative research using all these econometric methods and etc. So in that respect, I'm probably a very lucky person to have different insights, experiences to kind of say things could be different in certain ways.
All right. Well, we're happy to have that very broad experience and expertise on the podcast today. I want to talk more about some things I'm interested in. I'm a very selfish person, so the questions that were related to this podcast, I put the ones I was most interested in first. So that's how selfish I am. So the first publication I'd like to talk about comes from the ABD Country Diagnostic for those listening. And you wrote chapter 8. In this chapter, there's a table, 8.1, titled Selected Human Resource Indicators 2015. In this indicator, we see a list of countries with various indicators. What I was intrigued most in from this chapter was the percentage of internet users. Russia and Kazakhstan are tied with 73% of their population being internet users, followed by Armenia at 58%, Uzbekistan at 43%, Kyrgyzstan at 30%, and Tajikistan at 19%. I'm curious why Kyrgyzstan is so low on the list. It's second to last, and it's just 11 percentage points ahead of Tajikistan. Can you please give us more insight?
I think that type of statistics, particularly internet access, probably changed quite dramatically. I would think it's probably 80% or so at the moment. But the funny thing was when we started looking at this report that government bodies didn't know exactly what numbers are in terms of telecommunication access and internet access, and we would ask what numbers you use when you operate your work, and there was no really answer, and it was really surprising. So these numbers probably come from the same source, and if it's 2015, I was even doubtful at the time that these numbers are correct. In my view, if you look around, practically any person in this country now using internet, even in areas very remote, very distant in Susamur, there is opportunity to use internet. It's not very strong one, but everyone using WhatsApp and other programs. So yeah, I mean, those numbers come from so-called household surveys where you ask people, do you use internet? And in that respect, maybe some people just don't realize they're using internet, they use WhatsApp. And that sense that WhatsApp uses internet maybe doesn't bother them. So in that respect, I also thought it's quite low number at the time.
Okay, so with that explanation, would you say that it's accurate to say maybe internet usage is more uniform amongst Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and so forth?
I cannot say much about other countries. I was in Uzbekistan last year, in Tashkent. I don't know what's going on in rural areas, but in urban areas, definitely most people use smartphones, which means they also can use mobile internet.
Sure.
Which is super cheap.
Understandable. Moving on, in box 8.1, we read that the number of Kyrgyz working abroad is between 500,000 to 1 million. And by reading and from also just talking to folks, I understand that the Russian Federation is a really popular destination for being an economic migrant. Is there another popular destination aside from Russia where we could find a huge Kyrgyz diaspora?
It used to be Russia and Kazakhstan at the time when migration really became like a big phenomenon in this country. I think now migration is being dispersed. I think destinations like Turkey, some countries in Europe, United States are quite popular. I believe in Arab countries there are sizable amount of Kyrgyz migrants. But all these migrants also move from country to country. I know several IT guys in Berlin who are considering to move to United States because for the same jobs they seem to be getting better salary. So in that respect, and given this social, geopolitical situation, being in Russia is quite dangerous now, especially if you have already obtained Russian citizenship, that you can be easily recruited, not really even voluntarily. So in that respect, I believe there is quite a search effort going on to gain into new destinations, and I really see increasing amount of people coming to Germany, which I see from this Telegram channels where I'm a subscriber. So in that respect, I think that's quite active dispersion of Kyrgyz migrants around the world.
Okay. Do you think you could find pockets of Kyrgyz workers working elsewhere in Central Asia, maybe on the Tajik border or certain cities in Kazakhstan to this day, even if it's not as numerous as what Russia once was, or Germany or something?
I think Kazakhstan probably has a stable amount of Kyrgyz migrants, maybe already having some form of quasi citizenship, but it used to be mostly Russia, and I cannot really say there is a certain pockets. I probably could say from these Telegram channels that maybe there is a pocket of Kyrgyz in Turkey in Antalya region, because it seems to be a very active area of trips for them. Maybe for tourism sector, it's definitely employs a lot of people.
And what sort of activities do we find Kyrgyz economic migrants engaged in when they do work out of Kyrgyzstan?
Yeah, it's mostly blue-collar jobs. Things like construction, trade would be major sectors. I think there is a small portion of migrants who do good jobs in a way in IT industry, in other sectors, in services. However, it remains mostly very simple jobs, construction, trade again. When Russia was doing these big projects like Olympic Games or building, new Crimea, I think there were quite a wave of migrants, particularly going for specific projects where they needed more people. So I think there is not much that there is some new industries they are doing. I think these two sectors remain primary ones for Kyrgyz migrants.
Okay, and giving it a more Kyrgyz dimension, can you tell us about internal migration within Kyrgyzstan?
I think this country is well known for its freedom of movement. So in years before moving to my study to Germany, I was part of a team that would go to Turkmenistan, and it's where you don't see internal migration. So Ashgabat as a capital city looks quite empty compared to Bishkek. So in that respect, I think internal migration, mostly from rural to urban areas, is quite sizable. If you travel around Bishkek, it definitely looks like a big village, not really a city, meaning most people come here, settle, build a house. So I don't know what the extent of internal migration is. I would think internal migration is like a transit phenomenon, that people come here and they look for other opportunities abroad. So I would see in that way. From the other side, anyone who settles in a city probably keeps connection with his or her village. So in that respect, in our research, when you look at this internal whether a household has an internal migrant or external migrant, it kind of comes as a very significant factor, which I would think partly maybe resources, people sending money back, partly information, people saying do this, it looks beneficial, or any other mechanism which we probably don't understand, but it looks quite live. So people don't really break ties. They have a strong connection between cities and villages.
Sure. So that was about the ADB article. I'd like to move into the other article you sent me. So for the listeners, we'll be discussing this afternoon an article called Welfare Effects of Smallholder Export Participation, Evidence from Panel Data in Kyrgyzstan. Because the abstract it could say it better than I could, I'm just going to read off the abstract. The involvement of small-scale farmers in markets is crucial to alleviate poverty in low and middle-income countries. In this study, we examine the determinants and welfare implications of export participation for smallholders in Kyrgyzstan, utilizing household-level panel data for the period of 2010 to 2013, and employing fixed effects panel estimations. Our research reveals that the decision to participate in exports is primarily influenced by the geographical location of the farmers and their receipt of overseas remittances. Furthermore, we find no significant welfare effects from exporting when assessed using 3 welfare indicators. Consequently, we conclude that in the absence of organized export value chains, trade liberalization does not yield clear welfare benefits for small-scale farmers in impoverished countries. That's the abstract. In the very beginning of the article, we read an interesting statement. Smallholder farmers who own small plots of land account for roughly 60% of global agriculture and constitute approximately 2/3 of the population in poor countries. Could you please elaborate more on the significance of smallholder farmers in global agriculture and their contribution to the global food supply chain?
Yeah, I think smallholder households who have small plot of land, usually it's below 2 hectares, is how it's defined. Definitely a kind of visible feature of this country, which is still very close to being called poor country. And it's definitely in Asia, in South Asia, and in Africa, where the most poor countries are located. So in that respect, connecting these poor households who depend on agriculture to markets is considered to be important mechanism to help them to get out of poverty through trading, through selling for higher price. So in that respect, given this magnitude, how many people are smallholders and difficulties of connecting them to markets is a big topic for decades in agricultural as well as in development economics.
Okay. And still with some introductory features, what are some unique characteristics of smallholder farming and how does it differ from large-scale farming?
Yeah, smallholders are farms that employ own resources and invest own resources, meaning they have, say, 3 household members who can do some agriculture and they do agriculture, while definitely large farms employ other people. So in that respect, some reforms, for example, trade liberalization, brings different kind of effects to different set of farms. So smallholders may benefit by just stopping producing themselves, but being employed by large farms who can now produce in bigger amounts and in more standardized way and kind of be connected to global markets much better.
Mm-hmm.
So in that respect, there are different effects when government changes its policies, and sometimes they target smallholders, so they create conditions that they can produce certain products in standardized ways. It mainly relates to global commodities like coffee and other vegetables, but I think in case of Kyrgyzstan, things seem to be quite difficult.
That's a good segue into the next question, I believe. And from what I understand, a drawback of smallholder farmers is that they're obligated to engage more in informal trade because they cannot produce the standardized products or offer evidence of origin. What are some of the implications for smallholder farmers being barred from these high-end markets and thus export sales?
Yeah, in a way, probably it's inevitable that they operate in informal markets because the decision at the early years of independent Kyrgyzstan to distribute land to households compared to the model of transition in Uzbekistan and in Kazakhstan, this country was quite unique in that respect, and definitely one objective was to give people means to produce own food, given how much the transition brought a chaos and a decline in production in different sectors. So we definitely had people moving from urban areas, semi-urban areas to rural areas practically to own that plot of land. So they make free decisions what to plant and what to produce, but definitely given there is no incentive to produce certain products in certain ways, it's mostly about semi-subsistence, so producing own food, at least partly. So in that respect, the free market and lack of this so-called bigger opportunities along the value chains brings that they depend on markets. They depend on intermediaries who will offer them very low price, but from the other side, they also a blessing because they take their product, at least they can sell it for something. So in that respect, certain product markets are functioning quite well. Some markets are functioning really, really in difficult way. I mean, I think one of the reports I cite says that a product can change up to 9 hands before reaching the final consumer. And every stage, the price definitely gets higher. So you can imagine how much price is given to the first point, to the producer, very low.
Yes, these the number of times it changes hands and the intermediaries is something that I would like to discuss later on. Just more information about the smallholder farmers. According to your publication, smallholder farmers account for about 96% of Kyrgyzstan's agricultural output. Within the context of Kyrgyzstan, what are popular crops for these smallholder farmers?
I think it's a mix of both plant-based and livestock-based products. So potato, wheat, vegetables, fruits, probably most from plant-based side. And definitely we have livestock as a very important sector in agriculture, partly as a business, partly as a savings tool. So definitely it's cows and sheep and horse and poultry, which are most important types. But again, this combination of also producing plant-based products, but also having livestock as a form of saving is also an interesting phenomena in this economy.
For
It's
sure.
probably not surprising.
Narin is well known for its not land stock, it's livestock,
Right.
correct? Yeah. Moving forward, ethnicity has been a topic in your research. You have written about ethnicity and welfare in Kyrgyzstan before. As noted in your article, Ethnicity and the Distribution of Welfare, Evidence from Southern Kyrgyzstan, there's a lingering disparity between Uzbeks and Kyrgyz people in this country, particularly the south. Some are suggesting that history can help explain the disparity, as Kyrgyz were traditionally nomads and Uzbeks were traditionally farmers. I'm wondering if there's an ethnic component to modern Kyrgyzstan's smallholder farming today.
So second ethnic group in Kyrgyzstan, Uzbeks, are mostly concentrated in south part of the country, and they are traditionally engaged in plant-based agriculture, but also in trade. So in that respect, there is difference in terms of what agriculture every ethnic group does. Definitely Kyrgyz do more livestock in some areas like my the Susamur area, it's a very cold place, so livestock is probably practically only option to agriculture. So I think lately, given the lack of data in terms of ethnic groups, that was decision made also by government not to really produce data disaggregated at ethnic level. I think we don't know much what's going on since the conflict that happened in 2010. So I probably cannot say much at the moment what's the situation with ethnic minorities at the moment.
Okay. Now this is a more serious question. Also from the same article I just mentioned about Kyrgyz-Uzbek welfare, I found a passage that was very enjoyable. It reads, "Possibly, the Kyrgyz and Uzbeks have different understandings of a high standard of living, as suggested by the following proverb. When a Kyrgyz man becomes rich, he takes a second wife. When an Uzbek man becomes rich, he builds a second house." Dr. Esenaliev, as a Kyrgyz man, when you went to Berlin, did you take a second wife?
It means there is an assumption that when I moved to Berlin, I became rich, which probably is not true. So yeah, I have my wife and I don't have any intention to have more. But yeah, I think this proverb has probably some historical relevance to behavior of certain ethnic groups. In modern times, I would think both groups probably behave the same way. Definitely some demographic changes in social norms. Some people definitely have more than one wife. It's not only relates to Kyrgyzstan, but also probably to Kazakhstan and other countries. So in that respect, I think it may be a bit outdated. I would think aspirations now are much higher and more diverse than only wife and husband, a house. Sorry. So I think it relates also to many other things you can show off.
It's a very safe and lovely answer, I will say. Thank you. In the background section of your article, you go over previous research regarding welfare effects and smallholder exports. You mentioned previous studies on export horticulture in Kenya and tomato exports in Senegal. Why are these studies important to allude to in an article about Kyrgyzstan, and what do these African studies contribute to our greater understanding of smallholder farmers?
And any research goes back to say this is what we know about evidence on this particular topic. And in social sciences, evidence accumulates by saying this is a trend of research that, say, finds positive effect. And there is a group of research that says there is negative effect. And there is a group of studies that say null effect, no effect. So by conducting more research, it's about quantity, we can say it looks like 70% of research says it's positive. And over time, by accumulating this evidence and refining our research methods, improving our data, we say overwhelming number of research says this is what's happening and this is what we believe is happening. And by looking at the research done before, you definitely want to situate what you find to one of the groups of papers, and this is what you do. This topic is very well researched in Africa, partly because research funding is there, a lot of development aid goes to Africa, and in that respect, there is an opportunity to really look at certain countries, certain regions, certain products, and really distinguish them from households producing just one type of product, a crop, and comparing them to others. So if you look at this topic, then it's very clear that Africa dominates on this particular topic, but also in many other topics.
Okay. In our first ever and last podcast, Dr. Hager made a similar remark to what I read in your article. Still talking about the previous literature, you mentioned the literature on welfare effects from export participation in Central Asia is scarce. Maybe you can't give us an answer as to why there's an unfortunate lack of research in these subject areas, but do you think you share the same sentiment that there should be a lot more research in Central Asia about these topics?
In a way, being a person from this region, from Kyrgyzstan, I feel I know enough, but as soon as you go to an academic research and start looking what is available there, it's clear that Central Asia is really lagging behind, especially in academic research. So that was one reason we hopefully will talk about this Life in Kyrgyzstan study. It was one of the initiatives to close that gap by collecting data and providing it for free for academic research. So in that respect, we believe it's also not only data collection and providing it out to others for research, but also making sure there is a lively exchange of ideas and research findings by conducting annually an academic conference in Bishkek, which happens every October. So we are going to do it this year for ninth time. So next year it's going to be 10 years. So that's another way of closing that gap and making sure that Central Asia is represented and diverse topics are researched as well.
Okay. And because I do want to get to the Life in Kyrgyzstan study, I'll probably skip a couple questions about this article so we have enough time.
Yeah.
Still, let's look at some core findings. In Kyrgyzstan, agriculture value chains and export chains are dominated by intermediaries. We covered this earlier a little bit. You even say that products might have to traverse as many as 7, but today you said 9, different markets before reaching the final customer. How did this happen?
Anyway, yesterday I was helping to my brother to pick up raspberries. So he has a field of 2 hectares of raspberries. And it's probably most organized value chain in terms of a product. So what happens, he just collects his raspberries and he calls to the first person in that chain. And because raspberry is a product that kind of needs to be delivered very quickly before it gets spoiled, it looks like at least it has at least 4 stages before it goes mostly, as I understood, to Kazakhstan. So my understanding that the guy who picks up, who delivers to this collection point, sells to the truck drivers who take them to Kazakhstan. So about 4 or 5 hands changed. Other products you have to deliver to market. There are certain periods, harvest period, when, for example, in Isikul area, apples or apricots are bought at more or less at the gate. But otherwise, it's really a farmer who needs to bring his or her product to market, and it's one way to sell directly to consumer, which is very costly, very time consuming. From the other side, you just deliver and sell to someone for a price you think it's fair. So in a way, as I understood, certain products really change a lot of hands. Certain products have shorter routes.
I'm curious if intermediaries are a commonplace feature in Central Asia.
At least in this economy, I believe so. And as we mentioned before, they're also a blessing, because people say before we had to kind of organize everything by ourselves, hire a truck, deliver to market, try to sell it, and at the end, all the efforts and time not worth the price you charge higher from a buyer. And in current market functioning, intermediaries are really saving your time and probably money by providing their services, and definitely they're risk takers. What if they buy and within days, if they keep it for storage, within months things change, mostly prices change or get spoiled or whatever. Borders are closed, which happens as well. They take risks, and probably they charge quite a good premium for that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Moving on. The Kyrgyz government places a great importance on expanding the agricultural sector through promoting agricultural exports. In 2015, Kyrgyzstan joined the Eurasian Economic Union, and in 2016, Kyrgyzstan gained access into the European Union's Generalized Scheme of Preferences. Can you tell us more about the state's accession into these communities and what impact it has on the smallholders?
So first one is this Eurasian Economic Union, which is currently consists of Russia, Kazakhstan, Armenia, Belarus, and Kyrgyzstan. Kyrgyzstan being more or less one of the last to join. And one of the arguments was indeed that we are kind of opening a market of hundreds of millions of people, and that's how we gain economically, which didn't happen. So we have episodes of stories, Kyrgyz trucks being stopped at border in Kazakhstan or in Russia on grounds of safety, or any ground can be a reason to stop them. And we believe in certain cases it was a political decision just to stop. Yeah. So in that respect, it was quite mixed picture, meaning certain sectors benefited quite a lot, in my view. Things like textile industry was already successful, and given current geopolitical situation as well, it looks like it's really booming. From the other side, we got potatoes and cheese from Belarus, and it was at the time related to exchange rate policies of the central bank in Kyrgyzstan, which kind of kept the currency strong, and because ruble was going up and down, it was sometimes very beneficial to bring cheese from Belarus. So at the time, it was not clear whether it's going to be benefiting. I'm honestly cannot really say at the moment what is the effect from joining the Eurasian Economic Union at the time. And plus with the war in Ukraine, it's now even more confusing. It looks like, again, some sectors are benefiting, and Kyrgyz economy as a whole also seems to be benefiting if you look trade numbers. But if to look at other initiatives, as we said, GSP Plus, giving access to Europe, again, the issue of really delivering a product Europe will accept is an issue, and probably this is mostly on paper. There are certain types of niche products that go to Europe, but it's very, very far from a smallholder to be part of the chain.
That's very unfortunate. I expected a little bit more of a happy conclusion. But going on, within this conclusion, you indicate our analysis suggests that export participation does not have a favorable impact on the welfare of the smallholder farmers in Kyrgyzstan. I think this is, as Dr. Hager said in my last interview, the $1 million question. And I think you probably covered a good portion of that, but is there anything else you'd like to talk about with this question?
Anyway, any research has own limitations, and we usually try to be honest about it. In the whole review process, when you don't know who you are talking with about your methods and data, etc. So it covers a relatively short period of time. It has more or less unique sort of data that helps to distinguish whether it's more or less causal. But whatever I tried, it looks like from the data, basic data, it was clear that there is not much difference between those who sent their goods for export, more or less destined to export, from those who sell for domestic market. And I think nobody was surprised to get that result. I think that was from the early initial findings. People say, yeah, this is what we know.
Okay. I want to have more time to cover our other topics, but before we do that, is there any other insight or something else you'd like to say about this article that we should understand before we move on?
As I said, there are limitations in any research in terms of data or methods, etc. So currently I'm looking at in what extent just selling compared to those who don't sell at all is my current topic of research, where it looks like there is a little bit of effect. People who sell seem to be a bit better in terms of welfare. But again, it's surprising that participation in markets in this country doesn't seem to be still having much benefit to smallholders. So let's see.
Indeed, let's see. But let's talk about life in Kyrgyzstan. In your own words, can you please describe the Life in Kyrgyzstan study?
So it's a panel study, a study that exists in many other countries as well, and it covers around 3,000 households. We include all household members, which translates to either 8,000 adults or 13,000, including children. And the idea is that we will trace them every time we collect data, the same people over time, And the longer this panel, the better it is for conducting research and not only research. So it was started in 2010. Since then, we collected so-called 6 waves, 6 times, so 6 episodes of data collection. So we hope this study will be continued in future and will be one of the useful resources, data sources for conducting research. And I think we had received quite a lot of praise for doing this work. We know that more or less regular data collection would be much better, but unfortunately academic research funding comes at a cost. You have to compete and get the funding, which is not cheap, so data collection is quite expensive.
Mm-hmm. And what is your role in the Life in Kyrgyzstan study?
So my doctoral study was part of this initial project, and first 3 waves were funded by Volkswagen Foundation that also funded my doctoral kind of fellowship or scholarship. Since then, being from the inception of the study, I've been part of the study till now. And at some point, I was named like a study coordinator, which means many things, from logistics, from design of questionnaires, from data collection, from data cleaning, from data dissemination, many stages of data production. So I think probably I'm a person who probably knows most answers to any question regarding the study.
That's a pretty big accomplishment to know the most, like the guy you go to for answers. Speaking of the data production and those questionnaires, what types of questions and inputs are included in these surveys?
It is so-called multi-topic, which means we ask many sorts of questions. So because it's called life, life has many dimensions. So it's like a conversation. You start, how is life? Yeah. So-called life satisfaction module comes first. And we start asking about education, about health, about migration, about income, about consumption, about any shocks they experienced. And then at individual level, we also ask about questions, things like trust to governments, to people, aspirations, for example, satisfaction with services, for example, or participation in certain groups or networks, participation, decision-making in local life. So every time, definitely, we include some new topics, but the panel also should have some fixed topics that you should trace over time. So, for example, social cohesion would be one topic we introduced in a couple of waves. So given it's also multidimensional, very complex, you have to ask many questions. Very specific to this economy, to this country, was a question on bride kidnapping or forced marriage. We had few colleagues who were very interested in this topic, and they kind of devised certain modules. For a couple of times, we had so-called toy module, toy meaning festivities in Kyrgyz language, because it's such a big phenomenon in this country. Everyone spends around August till late November. It was period of weddings and other celebrations, and everyone complains they have to contribute and go to this festivities, and it's a big part of the economy, and we wanted to understand more. So I would say, again, there are certain topics we collect all the time. There are certain topics that go and come and go. Yeah.
Speaking of toys, from what I understand, it's like someone will go to a toy for any type of occasion, like as soon as your baby walks, toy, circumcision, toy. People like doing this for the most part. Maybe not the contributions like you said, but people like these buildings and the celebrations, right?
Yeah. I think it's overwhelming. I mean, it's just surprising how people organize it. They don't like it. It looks like most of them, but they do it. Partly it's a saving mechanism. So people help each other. So if my daughter gets married, then I invite my friends and whoever I'm closely connected. And it's part of recognition, part of introducing your child to society, but also economic part. Yeah, so you expect some contribution made, and because I went to my friend's son's wedding at some point and I contributed some amount. So in that respect, it's an exchange of, say, help, and those who don't have many kids probably are disadvantaged in that respect.
Mm-hmm.
But it takes a lot of energy, takes a lot of time. But from the other side, probably there is a role in all of this, and it's probably one of the topics we don't understand enough. I think there is probably certain role of festivities, all these social things people do. My take is that it also serves kind of equating in terms of inequality. So because you invite your friends and your families and your more or less tribe, you want people from different economic background to meet, connect, help each other. So that's one of the, spaces where people meet of different backgrounds, and that's why maybe people keep doing it, because the networks, they are really powerful here.
I think to tie in this other study that's developing right now that you have with Elnora and Dr. Hager, do you think the toy supports and fosters pro-social behavior because it does bring people together and there's some acts of selflessness with giving and the communal involvement?
I mean, toys were in lives of people all the time, that they're becoming more intensive, more extensive. It looks like people are tired from it, but also keep doing more and more of it.
Okay.
So in that respect, definitely the role of connecting, as I said, remains. And I think that's, again, one of the areas where probably we have to understand more, not only on quantitative side, but also mostly probably qualitative research has a space in discovering what does it mean.
Okay. Well, as much as I do like talking about toys, I'll bring us back to the Life in Kyrgyzstan study. You were able to use data from the Life in Kyrgyzstan study in the article we just talked about regarding smallholders, correct?
Correct.
What did you take from that study?
So anyway, I'm in an advantageous position to sometimes collect data I need for a certain topic, and it was exactly a case. We asked people whether they export their products, and if so, how much, how often, etc. And it is not only case in my paper, but in many others. As I just said, we had a group of friends, researchers who were really interested in this forced marriage topic. For example, a colleague from the World Bank was interested to learn how much, in what extent people participate in local decisions with local governments, and we collected data which became quite interesting and quite unique. So my saying would be that we are quite flexible, as many other studies, for example, British or there is a study called Young Lives. They announce a call for questions in their questionnaires, and if you really propose a very interesting set of questions explaining what research question it's going to uncover, then it could be included. So more or less the same process in Life in Kyrgyzstan study.
Okay. And from the origins of the project, because you were involved in it within your PhD studies, correct?
Correct.
So what were some of your first takes, and what were some projects you were involved in early on with the Life in Kyrgyzstan study?
So life in Kyrgyzstan is mostly about data collection, right? It's also about capacity building. We had a series of summer schools on certain topics. But also, as I said, it's a networking. It's about conferences. We also, next to the conference days, we also conduct so-called data user workshops. So teach people how to use data and certain indicators. Beyond, because it is collected continuously, you can also look how much effect certain programs, for example, World Bank or other development institutions, do have effect on people. And interestingly, around this idea of life in Kyrgyzstan, we had several big projects looking, for example, on topic of social cohesion. We also had a so-called impact evaluation study among high school students in south of Kyrgyzstan. There was so-called tolerance training, or more or less peace building program implemented. And it also connects with life in Kyrgyzstan because you ask the same questions and kind of know baseline levels from the study to be applied to other purposes. So what I would say is that it generates new ideas, new projects around this own idea of researching lives of people here in Kyrgyzstan.
Okay. Talking about the website itself, there's a description, and it includes all members of the households in 2010 are tracked for each wave, and new household members are added to the survey and tracked as well. There's a very large amount of people involved in this. This study boasts a record of tracking over 3,000 households and 8,000 individuals over time. So with the addition of new household members over time, how does this survey able to manage and maintain a consistent and accurate tracking process?
It's a difficult. So I think we were a bit worse than comparable studies in other parts of the world. So I think we've been losing about 5% of our respondents with every wave. So some waves larger number, some waves less. Definitely when new people join to these households, it helps. When new babies are born, then your sample kind of maintains. But definitely people move, people migrate, people refuse, and it's reasons when you cannot do much because you practically cannot find these people. They move to Russia, or people just say, I don't want to participate in the study, and we have to respect their rights to do so. Mm-hmm. So in that respect, it's more or less trying to persuade them that it's important, that it's useful, sharing with respondents our research findings. But definitely it's a job of interviewers to persuade that keeps the respondents in the panel.
Okay. And before we move on to our next topic of conversation, is there something else you would like us to know about the study? Any final thoughts?
I think everyone is looking forward that the study will be continued, and our team, several organizations, including University of Central Asia in Bishkek, which also operates in Kazakhstan and Tajikistan, is a major partner here, and we have a vision that the data should not be about Kyrgyzstan, should not be collected from an institution in Germany. Mm-hmm. It should be collected by an institution in Kyrgyzstan. So that's our long-term vision, and hopefully it will be implemented by time I retire.
That is a fair point. And what wave will be next? What number?
So it will be number 7.
Number 7.
Yeah, hopefully next fall, latest, we hope we can raise funding to collect new wave of data.
Very well. For the last bit of our segment, we're just going to talk about some light conversational topics. So, in your opinion, right now, what are the hottest topics that everybody in Central Asia or interested in Central Asia should be aware of?
I think it's mostly geopolitical, partly because what's going on this war in Ukraine, and given huge role of Russia so far for Central Asia, especially for Kyrgyzstan, both in terms of getting cheap energy resources, having so many migrants in Kyrgyzstan and receiving remittances from them, and having more or less strong political connections. From the other side, China becoming really a big player, mostly economically. Any infrastructure projects that you can point to, probably funded by Chinese money. And China becoming number one kind of creditor body country that gives money to Kyrgyzstan, which is probably a case in many countries in the world, is probably an interesting question that is on a surface. From the other side, I think there were many episodes of efforts to have own effort to be to coordinate and integrate within Central Asia. And the developments in Uzbekistan are quite encouraging. I think since new president came into power, he was very active, very open. And I think in that respect, given its size of economy, I think it's very positive news for the whole region. Definitely the whole conflict in Ukraine drives also current economic developments. If you look at Kyrgyz trade statistics, it's overwhelming to see how much import was done in 2022. But also you see huge export going to Russia. So definitely there is something coming and going to Russia, and this economy is not first time benefiting from transit trade. Mm-hmm. Other side, internally, I would say the energy of the current government trying to do reforms. Yeah, and more or less it's very stable. Country is run by a president who seems to has a very strong foundation now, meaning not only him, but there are practically two people running the country. But the efforts they're doing, especially raising revenues from internal sources, is unprecedented. And they're able to take some parts of economy out of shadow. So by just having this machine that gives you receipt was not really very common in small and medium business. Now they kind of pushing that every business has that. So they are seeing a lot of transactions. And the evidence they're showing, for example, some restaurants paying just small amount of money just 2 years ago, which is like 10 to 20 times more now. Mm. So in that respect, they're doing quite job, very aggressive, very energetic in some ways. Too pushy, I would say, but I cannot really say I monitor developments very closely, but things you see give some hope. Meaning they transfer those revenues to construction of schools, construction of roads and other things they can point to. And in that respect, it's quite respectable what I see, what I can say at the moment.
I'm glad you would talk about something outside of Kyrgyzstan, but broader Central Asia as well. I read an article on EurasiaNet titled The New Cities of Central Asia. The article highlights Turkmenistan's inauguration of Arkadagh, an up-and-coming smart city given billions of dollars in development funding that has become a regional capital last year. Similarly, Kyrgyzstan is developing the city of Osman off Issyk Kul. Apparently, the Kyrgyz government imagines a future where Osman is going to hold up to 700,000 people. I want to know your take on this.
I'm quite cautious about this idea. First, it's an area of Issyk-Kul. That's what I understand. And the presentation made about months ago, which apparently was a combination of some architectural ideas from different parts of the world. And this idea of building an island in Lake Issyk-Kul, I was thinking maybe it's enough. The lake is small and it's already struggling from the pollution and other things. So in that respect, I didn't think it's a good idea. From the other side, this country is quite familiar with many promises that never fulfilled. So we have to see. I don't know why these investors are interested in building a city in Kyrgyzstan. Probably there are many other options in the world. My take that it's practically probably the capital accumulated in the country that is coming back. From the other side, the location seems to be maybe strategically not good. While making this family trip to south, I was driving through Susamar, which is very cool place, meaning in terms of temperature. So in south at that day, it was like 42 degrees. When we went up to the pass, which is high on mountains, it was 9 degrees. And in that Susamar Valley, which is really big and has a lot of land and water, I thought maybe it's the ideal place, and given climate change and rising temperature globally, to build a city, not in Issyk-Kul Lake, but here, because it's a bit cool in terms of temperature and has enough. It's exactly in the middle of the country, yeah. So in terms of Osman, I'm a bit pessimistic. I'd rather not to build cities there from scratch, but recover small cities that are in very difficult economic situation around the country.
And what's the status of Osman right now? Is there any type of industry, or is there something special about this city?
I don't really have much information besides what is available in the press, so probably I cannot really comment. It looked like a futuristic city with smart city, with all the conditions for comfortable life, with some global high-level excellent universities and all the centers. I mean, it's difficult to imagine that such things would happen very quickly, easily. If you think about University of Central Asia, probably one of the few examples of this global aspirations. They built a campus in Naren city, and hopefully you've seen it or you want to see it. And it's amazing. It's just stunning what they did. But it took them probably 15 years easily to come up to that state, and a lot of money and funding and efforts and of huge amount of people. And this is what it takes. And by just saying we built Osman in a few years, I don't know, maybe I'm too pessimistic, but this comes from the experience of many promises that never fulfilled.
I think I might share your pessimism. But something I do feel like you're well entitled to comment on, I should have asked this earlier, but what is the industry or current status of Susamir, where you're from? What are they involved in for the economy?
It's a big valley, quite high in terms of altitude. And the village I was raised is quite cold. So there are no big trees, so no fruit trees. You can raise vegetables. So it's very simple economy, mostly livestock, because they are located in this road between Osh and Bishkek. there is some trade like services, food provision, a little bit of tourism sector, but not every household can participate. You again have to invest if you want to be part of this community-based tourism, which I also find very cheap for terms of, again, coming back to the topic of smallholders. So my uncle's family accepts, hosts tourists, and they charge 1,000 soms per night with breakfast, which is like 10 euro.
Yeah.
For me, it sounds too cheap. And if they asked for a dinner, it should be 2-course meal for 500 soms. And certain prices are not right. Yeah, they are not benefiting kind of the first value chain point. So in that respect, certain things to be probably, as Anselm was saying, some tourists don't really mind paying much higher. At the end, they may benefit even by getting better services and giving benefits more to hosting families. So yeah, the Susamar is a well-known place. Used to be summer pastures during Soviet times. So livestock is number one, but also, as I said, some little bit of trade and tourism, and definitely public sector, schools. And
let me just say, as a cheap tourist, I don't mind the idea of 10 euros a night, but that's just me. But yeah, they should probably get the prices right. Well, I think that's all we'll do for today. We're coming near the end. So I just want to thank you so much for your time, and any concluding thoughts that you'd like to talk to our guests about today.
As I said, I like going out and looking at lives of people. And this time, what strikes me is the dynamism and energy changes happen in this economy. So sometime when we are out of the country for a couple of years and travel around Bishkek, some areas which I mean, it's about buildings where you say this is this area. Some areas are just unrecognizable to me. I mean, there are good changes which probably driven by government who wants to show by finger saying this is what's happening. From the other side, there are certain things that you cannot point, but also has good developments, but also not good developments. So people say one thing that I discussed a few times with others is that people stopped in villages visiting each other. And it used to be that it was just open space. You just go to your neighbor's house. If there is no one inside of the house, you just borrow bread from the stock to be returned next day when you bake your bread. And that type of interaction seems to be on decline. And that's what people seem to be regretting. And this is what modernity brings to all this cell phone communication. You just call or you buy that bread in your local shop. So there are changes, and probably we cannot say that those times were better or this time is worse. And for different people, different generations, own time is probably the best. So in that respect, it's very interesting to observe changes in the economy you were raised, but also as a person who is quite close to kind of maturity, I also share regrets of people from older generation who say the life was better in the past.
Mm-hmm. Well, if it makes you feel any better, before we conclude, you're free to come in my little apartment in Jal, take out some smetana and bread. It's on me.
Thank you, Austin.
Yeah, but thank you so much for coming on, and thank you to our listeners.
Yeah, thank you. It was a pleasure to be with you and share my thoughts, and thank you for organizing this podcast.
100%.